Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. Sometimes when I get down on myself, I often wonder, do I make a difference? Well, these next 3 stories I'm about to tell you remind me that I do make a difference. Now, my first story involves a very dear friend of mine. Her name is Mary Lou. Now, I met Mary Lou back in the day when I worked at Granddaughter TV. She went on mat leave at the same time as I got laid off, and she invited me over for a coffee one afternoon to chat. So I went over, and we sat there and chatted for over 2 hours. And that began our friendship. Every couple of weeks, I would go over to Mary Lou's armed with a Timmy's, and we would chat for a couple of hours. That went on for several months, until such time as I moved to Brampton. Then when I moved to Brampton, every time I would go to London to visit my parents, I would always stop by and visit Mary Lou for a couple hours before I went home. Now during this time, Mary Lou had developed a very rare lung disease that caused her to be on oxygen 24/7. And sometimes I would go over there and I would feel guilty because most of our conversations revolved around me and my life and what was going on in my life. My lack of love life and so on. And I can recall many times Mary Lou would say to me, "Dave, I wish I knew somebody that I could set you up with, but my friends are all married." So my visits continued for the next several years. And shortly after I had started working at Cash Money, I got a phone call from her husband that Mary Lou had passed away. So when I drove to London for the funeral, and when I got there, her husband comes up to me and he says, Mary Lou thought the world of you. He said, "We'd like you to be a pallbearer." Now that's a task that's usually reserved for very close family members or very close friends. So I was honored. And I did my task, and after the funeral was over at the reception, her husband introduced me to her parents, who I had never met. And the first thing out of her mother's mouth was, "Mary Lou always talked about you." She said, "Thank you for being such a good friend." And I realized I made a difference in Mary Lou's life. Now, about 6 months later, I met my wife, Joan, which most of you know that passed away from cancer back in 2013. Now, Joan and I were never legally married, and I never took the vows in sickness and in health, but in my heart, I did. So when she began to get sick, I looked after her, as I should. Now, after she passed away and after the funeral, people were leaving, and her brother stopped, and he said to me, he says, "Thank you for looking after my sister." And I thought, that's a strange thing to say. Of course I looked after her. What do you think I'm going to do, leave her? And after talking to another friend recently, this friend told me, yes, some guys would just up and leave. So I realized I made a difference in her life. Now this third story involved my granddaughters up in Moosonee. There's 4 of them up there. 2 years ago, my oldest granddaughter graduated from high school, and she asked me to come up to watch her graduate. So I went up, and she treated me like a king. She gave me up her bedroom that was on the main floor, so I didn't have to do the stairs. And while I was there, I promised all 4 of them that I would come up for their graduations. Now this past June, the second one was due to graduate. But the problem is that my other stepson decided that he was going to get married in Mexico. And financially, I didn't think I could do both the trip up to Moosonee as well as the trip to Mexico. So in March, I turned to her and I told her that I didn't think I'd be able to come up for graduation. She said that she understood, but I could see a little bit of sadness in her eyes. But about a month before she was due to graduate, I was talking to her father, and her father and mother decided to help me out financially so that I could go up. But we decided to surprise her. And when I got up there, I was greeted with a copious amount of excitement and tears that I actually came up for her graduation. And again, I realized I made a difference in her life. So the moral of my stories are, if you think that you don't make a difference out there, think again, because I'm sure you have your own stories that will tell you differently. Mr. Postman.